Someone always
Like
hates it.
if it's a great product, someone's still gonna hate it. If it's a bad product, someone's still gonna love it.
Someone spent like 100 hours making this, and it's like they're selling it for like nothing.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. We have a special guest here, DMS. You may have heard of him before.
Maybe
Yeah, he's here to talk us through reviewers' perspectives, I suppose.
something like that.
Yeah, we got a vaguely, maybe, interesting video planned.
You
Gonna
guys
talk
have the
about-
manufacturer perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of going on the other side.
Yeah. The two different perspectives of the things.
Yeah.
Because as it turns out, there's stark contrast between the two. When you make a thing, you tend to think about things differently than when you review a thing. It's like a whole
Well,
thing here.
It's my job to complain about things manufacturers do.
Uh-huh.
You know,
And it's my job to complain about reviewers.
it could be.
Could be.
Well, a lot of times we don't necessarily understand the same things you guys are kind of angling towards, and likewise.
This is true.
So, I mean, if you were a reviewer, because you've seen all the headphones that I've just like brought in for various things, I'll be like, oh, I'm checking this thing out, and you'll try it on, and you'll be like, this sucks.
Yes.
So if you were a reviewer, you'd probably just be like,
This is
sucks.
terrible. Don't
This
buy it.
sucks. This sucks.
That's how I review products.
Yeah.
It's true.
So I mean, and a lot of things do.
I suppose I have a different perspective, as you might imagine. I tend to look at things from a more of like a design and a absolute type of perspective. So cost is less considerable, and that doesn't mean it doesn't matter, of course. Sometimes you see products that are exceptional for the cost, and they're made very well for what they
Right.
cost. But it's common to see products, because they're cheap, they use that as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
It's cheap, so it's acceptable that it's not good.
Right.
And I think that's lazy. There's a lot of ways you can make something really quite exceptional, but it takes a lot of effort. And you either don't have the experience, you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to be able to make a design for a low-cost product that's exceptional.
Right. Well, I mean, likewise, you can make a product that cuts a lot of corners, and people would still buy it because it's cheap.
Yeah.
You know, like you have your fancy scissors in there. I was just talking about your fancy scissors in the shop. You don't see those everywhere because people are just willing to buy the cheap scissors.
Right. Well, I have some cheap. Well, I got different scissors for all different things. That's the thing. Those are my nice. I actually bought it. I liked them so much, I bought a pair for home.
There you go.
But
Go home, cut a piece of paper with it, and you're like, Shh. Oh,
no,
yeah,
no,
that's nice.
the kitchen shear version.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
It is surprisingly nice.
They're
though.
actually even
Yeah.
more expensive.
Yeah. I didn't think you could justify spending like $70, $80 on a pair of scissors, but they're really nice.
I mean, well, I know I get it now, having kind of been around that a little bit more and coming around here. Like,
Yep.
I was looking for some snips because I broke my snips that came with my 3D
Uh-huh.
printer. I hit him up and was like, "What's the hot ticket item?" And you recommended me some that were really cheap.
The
They were made
CHP
in
170s?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Or I don't know what they were, like $9 or something.
Yeah, they're pretty affordable.
cheap. We use I have those, and then I have some $80 ones.
Yeah.
So they're for different tasks.
But they can still make a cheap one that's really solid.
Yeah.
So it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of companies aren't incentivized to do so.
No. And I think the biggest issue is, as a consumer, you might be unaware, but it's very, very, very difficult to design low-cost, exceptional products. And that's
Right.
why you just don't see it. It's not to say it can't be done, but you need typically a lot of funding. Typically, it's very expensive to get everything perfect. And it tends to mean there's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of redos before the consumer sees it. So you might have to make, if it's a plastic part, you might have to do the injection mold 5 times
Yeah.
to get everything fit perfect, to look perfect, to have, when you look at it in the sun, all the lines where the parts connect like that, everything's even, consistent, reliable, that feels nice. And
Right.
to get everything to fit just perfect, it could be very, very expensive.
Right, and then depending on the volume of the product, if you have to redo an injection mold 5 times,
Yeah, it's crazy money.
That's a lot of money, yeah.
But when you make 1 million of something,
It's different.
it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? You hope you have the money and the funding initially to be able to get by until you're selling it.
Yeah.
But in this hobby, unfortunately, you might only sell 100, 1,000, 10,000 of something, and it totally changes how things can be made. So it's very uncommon to see very, very well-made products in the low end. But still, personally, when I look at things, I tend to see a lot of low-cost products that are just sloppy. They're designed in a way where somebody didn't have experience or the knowledge or didn't care about particular components of the product because they didn't feel the cost or the time was justifiable, or they just didn't have the experience.
Yeah.
And I like putting the effort into the design so that every time you ship a product, more or less, you're getting that free benefit. You're getting the superior design every time for no additional cost. All it took was the input initially, the initial upfront investment in time and sometimes a
Right.
little cost, and then every product subsequently is better.
There are lots of things that, like, it didn't occur to me before, but now that I've had, time to kind of be around here and kind of see what you guys do and see how things are made and have more of an understanding of an engineering perspective, there are a lot of, like, things out there that I look at them and I'm like, how in the world do they build, X for this cheap and still have a profit margin?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there's always the products that are like, I don't even know how they make it for this.
Yeah.
And that's always the most impressive thing. It's like, it may not be the best, but it's like, how do they make it for that cost?
Yeah, right. Like they either have to be going on like razor thin margins, and it's just like something that is just barely enough volume to justify it, or it's
Yeah.
like low volume, there's razor thin margins. I don't know how it's possible.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah, especially low volume products. It's like you see that at like craft shows and stuff. It's like someone spent like 100 hours making this, and it's like they're selling it for like nothing.
Yeah,
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 that's
Yeah, you
usually
see
where you
things
see it.
like that.
Low
Just-
volume, handmade stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, though, is a little misleading.
Yeah,
Because if somebody's making it as a hobby, more or less out of their house, they don't include all the costs that would exist if you were a business hiring employees. You have a building and stuff like that. Your fixed overhead costs, more or less, are not included because
Yeah.
you're considering it to be a hobby. You're not buying space specifically to manufacture this product. You're not paying taxes and whatnot to your for your employees and et cetera.
or research and development going through the cost of like building 100 units that are all just like test units with small variations and things like that.
Right.
Like,
You see a
that's
lot less of
expensive.
that in the hobby game.
Yeah,
You see people that they're willing to work for free effectively to make something that's cool and interesting. And maybe they put 500 hours into it and then they'll never get money out of that time. The billable average rate might be $1 an hour or something for how much time they put in over the life of them selling this thing, but they consider that acceptable. So
Right.
obviously that's not sustainable in a business sense.
Yeah, every time that you're doing a prototype of something or working on a new project, like, even if this is like, a business that you're running, sure, you might be able to like count off some of your own hours and stuff into it, but you have a building full of people, that are all working on this stuff. Like if you run something back to Keith and you're like, hey, we're going to run these as a prototype for the next thing we're working on, and he spends like 2 days running parts for all that stuff. Well, he's still getting paid for that 2 days. It's still money just coming out of your pocket, and materials and machine time and all that stuff to make something that isn't, going to ever be sold. It's just strictly for testing purposes and stuff like that. And that adds
Yes.
up a lot.
So that's exactly where all the cost comes from in this stellar design, because it's common that you don't necessarily know how a thing will work out until you do it. So the best approach, if you want a spectacular product, typically is just do it, see if it works.
Yeah.
And if you don't like the way it is, you don't ship it. But that's expensive. So obviously, there's only so much that you could do. And we have the privilege to be able to do these things in-house, so our costs are considerably lower for short-run prototyping than they would be outside. Because we're designing, programming, machining, everything in-house. And that gives you some leverage. It allows you to design for manufacture around your capabilities better than you would typically see externally. Because normally you're giving someone a drawing or something, you're saying, hey, here, make this. And you don't necessarily know whether or not they can make that efficiently. All you know is the end result, the price. And you could quote it around to multiple places, but really it's impractical.
Yeah.
Most people deal with one manufacturer for machine goods because they're the one they have a relationship with. They're the one that they know and trust and have been delivered good parts from before. So it's very uncommon to farm a thing out to 20 different suppliers every single time because you run into issues every single time with a new
You're
supplier.
stuck waiting on things.
Right. So you don't know if this part that you design is something they could run efficiently. And maybe the cost is much higher for that. You could pay 3, 4, 5 times more than it would be to do it in-house if you run efficiently in-house. But obviously, it requires you to understand the process well enough to be able to do it efficiently in-house as well. Because there's plenty of things that there's no way we can make for the cost you could just go and buy it for. That's common, and it's surprisingly common in industry. Even people that have insane experience, you see this with pretty much every industry. Auto manufacturers, there's luxury auto manufacturers that don't understand how you can make a car for 10 times less than what they make it for. Right? If they're used to making $100,000 cars, it can be very hard to understand how somebody can make a $15,000 car.
Right, and there's considerable design changes.
Totally
there, too.
different, yeah. All your
But,
processes you use are different.
There was another perspective I just thought on this too. Anytime that you have to build a prototype, like, if you got Keith to machine something, right?
Yeah.
And then you're working on like a driver and then you're putting it together and all this stuff. Any of the time that you have to take to put into that is time taken away from things that would normally be shipping to customers.
Well, that is kind of the problem, yeah, because, we still have to make the current product too.
Right.
So that is a problem. When we got to like be committed to like, all right, we're going to not make anything today and just work on a new product.
Yeah.
And that kind of sucks.
It seems kind of hard to set aside time for that.
Yeah.
I mean, as it is, it's like, finding half an hour to drag you guys away from that to do like these videos and stuff can be hectic on some weeks.
Well, I'm usually thinking about other things in case that's not
Yeah.
obvious from
Yeah,
the
right.
videos.
Well, yeah, usually when you're sitting here, you're thinking, okay, well, what do I have to finish for the rest of today?
Yeah, I got 3 other things.
Yeah,
I'm
right. When is
excited to get
UPS
done.
coming?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have a unique perspective because I've been able to experience the manufacturing side like we discussed, but also kind of beforehand, just the reviewing perspective. And my time before ever setting foot in this building, I guess it was a lot easier to take small things for granted, not just in the high-end products, but in the affordable products as well. But also kind of see things in a lot of products, even the more expensive products out there, that I was like, well, wait, they could have done this different or could have done this different or things like that. So whenever I see something, that is just well built, it's like, okay, well, this is well built. Now let's move on to everything else about it. It kind of blends into the background, whereas the things that are like glaringly obvious, like design oversights, and say like I get in like a $500 headphone, it's got like a massive problem with the fitment or with like some weird sharp edges or how a cable plugs in or something like that, it becomes really obvious. But aside from like just something feeling really nice and being sturdy, when something comes in, it's just like, this is built great, let's move on to sound. It doesn't really get appreciated.
And that's kind of the issue. And I think a lot of manufacturers look at that just like that.
Yeah.
They know most people will gloss over it because either they personally do or they just don't have the talent, the knowledge in-house to know how to make something spectacular, because the reality is it's very, very difficult, and a lot of consumers really don't care.
Yeah. Or they do care, but they don't know they care until they experience something that is built poorly.
Awful. Yeah.
But
As long
when
as it's acceptable.
Yeah. If it's built
fine.
well, they don't care. It blends. It's like they said, what was it? I don't know who said it was, but the best technology blends into the background.
You don't notice it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is like, I was talking to Josh Valor about this recently, because like I've had this phone, this iPhone 11, for a really long time. And you guys hear me talk about this too. It's like, man, I'm so bored of this phone, but it works really well.
Yes.
I never worry about all the little bugs and things like that. It blends into the background. It does its job.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're looking for that.
Yeah, but as a result of that, I probably don't appreciate all of the things it does well.
That's common, especially with phones, because everybody's bored with all phones because they're all pretty much the same now.
Yeah.
Just like a rectangle of glass.
Mm-hmm. Couple cameras, a
No,
bump.
nobody's coming out with anything like, oh, new.
Yeah. I mean, the folds are cool, but they're still like kind of...
And they have their own problems. So.
Yeah. I was thinking about one of those. I actually know I'll then go on a whole like side train on there, but yeah, that's a good way to compare it.
There's definitely a big difference between making a thing and just looking at a thing as a consumer.
Right.
Because it's easy as a consumer to look at something and say, oh, well, this is what it costs. It works. Who cares? And it's not a concern past that. But then you go and try to design the thing, and maybe you get a whiff of the challenges with the design. You can't fathom how it could be manufactured for that price, or you can't make it work as well as the commonly available thing off the shelf or something along those lines. And there's a surprising amount of facets to this, but it is oddly enough underappreciated, but extraordinarily difficult in most cases to make a spectacular, low-cost product.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's easier in the high end, but it gives you one thing less to worry about, right? You could afford more unique processes to manufacture the thing. It doesn't mean it ends up being a spectacular product. Obviously, that's still difficult, but it's a little bit easier in the high end than it is the low end. The low end, it's very, very difficult to make something spectacular. Right. And oddly enough, it's so commonly underappreciated. I think most designers are reluctant to put a huge amount of emphasis on low-cost goods because they know most people aren't going to care. Yeah. Oddly enough, they're appreciated more in the high end, even though it's typically harder in the low end.
Well, perspectives are going to vary a lot too, because like, look at the landscape of reviewers we have right now.
Yeah.
You know, I would say that after having experience and having a greater understanding of the engineering side of it, invalidates a lot of my knowledge and opinions that I had before a couple of years ago. Like a lot of things I look back on stuff that I said in old videos and I'm like, wow, I really had no idea what I was talking about there. Just because of like, you know, gaining experience in those areas. I know there'll be a lot of people who either have that perspective or don't. And that could be super polarizing and completely change whether or not they feel positively about something that they get their hands on.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a big factor as a designer, I would imagine, that most people struggle with. Because the trouble is you got to understand from a consumer's perspective what they're expecting. And that could be very different from what's achievable in that range. It could be your emphasis is on sound quality, sonic fidelity in the case of a headphone. So you funnel all your money into the driver, the acoustics, the geometry, materials, or something like that. And things that are less critical to you, the feel, the fit, the finish, whatever, you don't put an emphasis on. And as a result, it's lackluster. And time again, your reviewers bash it. But they don't understand in that price range you couldn't afford to do that. That's the sacrifice you choose to make. And it's tricky because you don't always see the same level of excitement for a well-rounded product. Sometimes you have like an iPhone, for example. Maybe it's not the absolute best in every regard, but generally speaking, they're pretty good at pretty much everything, right? Yeah. It's very hard to find a glaring fault with it because it's made for the masses.
Jack of all trades gets the job done.
Yeah, and it works great, right? Yeah. Obviously, most people use it. You look at the developed countries, iPhone's pretty damn popular, right?
Like 80% of today's youth in the United States are all using iOS devices.
So that says something. Clearly, it works very well for most people, but maybe it's not the absolute best in a particular category. You could find a phone that probably is better in something or another. And to some people, that really matters. But it's all about perspective, right? And I guess it's difficult to convey what the designer's perspective was at times. But you could design a product where you don't care about a particular facet of the design. And other people might. And they'll go around telling people it's a terrible product because of this. But it wasn't designed to work well at that particular thing. It was designed to work well at something else.
Right.
And it is difficult to convey that. You see a lot of reviewers tearing stuff apart for stuff that's kind of... It's complicated because I wouldn't really say unfair, but
like buying a Mac Mini and then reviewing it for gaming.
Right. It's not the workload you would expect to use it, so it's not a good gaming computer. But
you know, actually, on that, you bought the new was 16, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I've seen a ton of reviews of that, and no one has like touched basically at all about how it's this like machined aluminum chassis. Right. Compare it to like the equivalent computers, and it's just like one's plastic, one's metal, and that's never mentioned at all.
I mean, they kind of have been for like a decade now, though.
Right, so I guess it's not new.
Yeah, so everybody just accepts it, you know.
But from your perspective, you know the difficulty associated with machining a product.
Yeah, I remember. Well, that's why actually the first machined unibody MacBook I bought just because it was machined in unibody. I'm like, ooh. That's like, that has to cost a lot to do, and so I bought one.
Especially
just because of that.
Changing the design of that, too.
Yeah. At the time, like 08 or whatever, it was like impressive. But yeah, now it's been so long since then that, just
you get used to it. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it probably costs a lot to make different design iterations and completely change the shape of that unibody and, you know, set up a different machine process.
Well, that's the thing. They've looked the same on the outside this whole time, but the inside obviously has changed. They make it so you can't tell it's changed, but it has a lot inside.
Right.
So, especially the latest ones are a lot thicker now, you know, noticeably heavier. But, yeah. I mean, Some people call that boring. It's like they're just like, yep, they've looked the same for a decade, but I guess it works. So
Right.
they had no need to change it, really.
Well, that I guess all circles back around to like what you guys have said about Diana in the past, like
Same thing.
Yeah, you're kind of always doing little things to it. So like
Yeah.
Diana-Fi when it first launched versus the last Diana-Fi that came off the shelves were visually very similar. Just like Diana-Fi was visually similar to TC, but there was a whole lot of different stuff going on with the actual machining process over that time period.
Yep. Same thing.
Yeah.
Externally they look the same, but internally they're different. Yeah.
But if I was just like, if I had never set foot in this building and I was handed a Phi and a TC, immediately I might not see visually the differences unless I was like, oh wait, okay, the holes are a little bit bigger. Oh, the pattern's a little bit different. Wait, is this one lighter? Stuff like that.
Mhm.
But if I didn't know all those things immediately,
Well, yeah.
like I doubt that a lot of people would actually take the time to like investigate it and really look and see what those differences are. They'd just be like, oh, this iPhone 11 looks the same as the iPhone 13.
Well, it's pretty similar. Yeah.
Yeah, but then you get it in the hand and you're like, wait, the camera takes up this much space on the back now. Oh,
Well,
it's a slightly
I guess
different
that's
shape.
why they add a new color like every year, and then
Yeah.
everybody gets the new color, so then you could actually tell, oh, this is only available this year.
Right.
So it's like you could only tell it's new because of the color.
But you have the 13 something.
13 Pro
Yeah.
in the blue.
Look at this. Look at the size of the. I'm taking this out of the case. I got a D brand skin on mine. Look at the size of the camera on that.
Yeah.
There you go. Like the design language is similar, but like that is still a considerable change.
To some extent, that's a fair enough point. That whole like minor changes over time thing. The average consumer doesn't seem to be quite aware, but typically it's very expensive at certain scales to change a process. So you look
Yeah.
like Apple, for example. They're shipping their products typically in very high volume. And the only way they could really afford to make good margins on the product, making the way they make their laptops, is if they ship it high volume. If it was low volume, it would be crazy, crazy expensive. But because of the volume, that allows them to have pretty good efficiency. They could have a machine set up with a very crazy custom jig that holds the thing in a particular way that's super repeatable and efficient. And it only does one little process, super hyper efficient, and it goes from machine to machine. And the total part could be done 3 to 5 times faster, or somewhere in that range most likely, than if it was all done in a less efficient manner that you see more traditionally in one machine with multiple tool changes with one less optimized fixture. Typically at very large scales, you could get things hyper optimized, and it allows them to bring the cost down. So if they know something's going to be shipped in the millions of quantities, it allows you to pick the manufacturing processes that wouldn't exist normally.
Right.
And to the consumer, they look at a product and they go, "Oh, it's metal." That's as far as they go, right?
That's literally it. Yeah.
They all they really know is it looks like a particular material, and that's why you see things like scissors advertised as titanium, because to the consumer, it might as well be made out of titanium, and they think that that's cool for some reason.
Right.
But in reality, it's a plating, it's a coating, it's a chemical process or something like that, and it isn't actually a thing because it's not cost effective. Nobody can manufacture that pair of scissors out of a material like that at that cost.
Right.
And you see that a lot. You see minor changes being made over the years to things like anything pretty much Apple makes, because the cost to retool is so substantial.
Well, with that too, I imagine if let's say that you had a pre-order system and 1 million people pre-ordered a Diana.
Yeah.
If you were selling 1 million of a Diana, you'd probably do some things differently. Like
Totally different.
the process. Like I've seen how you guys assemble drivers and stuff like that, and it works great for precision, but it would take like a year of just a team constantly sitting there making drivers to be able
We
to keep
couldn't
up
make
with
it
that.
that.
Yeah.
You would never make it the way we make it at 1 million quantity. It's just it's impractical. And almost everything is like that. Typically, you design around the market, the capabilities you have, and the volume. There's some things that work great at low volume. You could do things by hand at low volume because the time, the money to invest in some sort of fixturing is just crazy. Sometimes you could have a very good engineer spend hundreds or thousands of hours of their time designing a apparatus to hold a thing to do something easier. And it saves you time. Maybe you save 5 minutes on every product. But 5 minutes on 1,000 pieces is stupid compared to the time that you invest to make the fixture.
Right.
But when you're in the millions of pieces, then it's easy. Then it's obvious. Then anything you could do to save time per unit, you do, because the upfront investment is trivial. and you hope you have a company with enough funding to be able to pay for all this stuff up front, because it could be very expensive. You could spend
Astronomical.
millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars, before you start making a single penny.
Yeah.
So obviously in a headphone game, it doesn't really work.
Because the quantity isn't necessarily there unless you're in
Right.
consumers.
You're never going to make your money back, and
Yeah.
that's just the reality. Who's going to invest tens of millions of dollars in something where you'll make $1 million back?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Unless you're making AirPods.
Yeah, but
or
they
Raycons
know
or something.
they're going to make huge volume. They know that, and it's
Right.
different. It totally changes the way the product can be made, and it totally changes your manufacturing processes, and it has really profound effects.
Didn't AirPods alone turn more profit than like Tesla or something like that?
I don't
saw
know
like a
about that.
graph.
Maybe then
was
or
pretty
something.
insane.
Yeah, AirPods sold a
It was,
bundle
I think it
of
was
units.
last year or the year before. Like
mean, it
just
sounds
AirPods
believable.
alone sold so much that it was
I
like
know they sold a
outpacing
lot.
car companies. Yeah. Which is kind of insane.
But yeah,
They sell a lot of
to
them.
your point, I remember just the other day Keith was just talking about this, like just switching fixturing over,
Yeah.
to do like a second op or something. It's like he's like, oh, I don't want to do it. It's like it's going to take hours just to get everything set up to do,
Right.
the second part of this. So clearly, if you're going for higher volume, you'd have to get more machines with that are just fixtured already. So because just changing things over is just a lot of work.
We waste 2 to 5 hours changing sometimes from one operation to another in the machines, and that's time that's just thrown out the window. It provides no value to the end user, but
Yeah.
it needs to be done. And if you were making 10,000 of something instead of 1,000, that same time would be spent. So, and if you're making millions of something, you would have dedicated machines for each task, and you wouldn't change anything ever. All the
Right.
tools would always be present. All the fixturing would always be in the same spot. And that's what you get with very large scale. So as a consumer, you tend to be unaware of these things because they don't matter to you, right? When you're buying a product, this is irrelevant for the most part, the quantity the
Right.
product ships in, but it has typically profound impacts on the way it's designed, the cost it could be shipped at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as it is, you guys recently, I say recent, within the past like half year, doubled your number of machines.
Yeah.
And like, it seems from my perspective, like, even with that doubling, it's like you guys are pretty much like right there at the line of like how much stuff you can make unless you like hired a considerably higher number of people to assist in making things.
Well, we, for the most part, have been running very efficiently, which is good. It's typically difficult to do, but we've been trying to run as efficient as practical, and that tends to mean that, we're pretty much at capacity.
Yeah. No department has downtime.
No, nobody's
Yeah.
sitting around. And obviously that's the dream. You always try to have that happen, but also match the consumer demand. But consumer demand is variable, so it's very difficult to do that perfectly. And you see that sometimes with startups. They forecast demand that ends up not being there.
Right.
And that's a big issue. They assume, we'll sell 1 million of these, but they sell 1,000, 10,000. So they invested all this money in some sort of setup, tooling, machinery, and whatnot, personnel even sometimes. And the demand isn't there. And now what do you do?
Right.
Now you're not going to get your money back. So it's risk is a reality when you try to set up for very high demand. And maybe if you're a very well-funded company and you have venture capitalists that are throwing money at you or something like that, maybe you could afford to try to throw other people's money away and solve problems there. But most companies aren't willing to do it, especially in the headphone business. They're really there's not enough demand to expect you're going to sell millions of something. So it limits the way things can be made.
Well, and there's the other side of that too. No matter how many people like it, someone's going to hate it.
Someone always
Like
hates it.
if it's a great product, someone's still going to hate it. If it's a bad product, someone's still going to love it. That's just how it is.
Yes.
Like you can put out something good or bad and still get like about the same number of mixed negative and positive reviews if you just look around on the
And that's a
internet.
fickle thing because really what matters isn't the positive and negative reviews, oddly enough.
Yeah.
It's when they hit.
Right.
If you start shipping and you already had several positive reviews, one negative one, water under the bridge. But if your first review is negative, it's more likely the second review is going to be negative because generally speaking, the reviewer will see that video.
You'll see positive
They'll know
stuff
what's
too.
happening.
Like the I don't feel bad naming this on here.
Yeah.
Take TH2 Plus.
Okay.
It is just like the most garbage plasticky thing that's ever existed on the planet.
Okay.
which someone I at the same time that was probably someone's passion project. But it's like you think of like bubblegum machine plastic, like the cheapest plastic you could imagine. That's like brittle, it oxidizes and like turns more brittle over time. It sat really weird on your head, clearly like hand bent things, and it just sounded like a Walmart driver just kind of sitting off in the corner that just rattled. And it only produced like a little bit of mid-range, like you're cupping your ears and listening to music like that. It was rough across the whole board.
That's nice.
And I was like, I don't get it. This thing doesn't make any sense to me. It's terrible. But then you look on the Headphone thread and people are like, this is the best thing I've ever heard in my life. This is life-changing. Oh my God. How does this not on every, store shelf ever?
Yes, you see that sometimes.
But you see that and you see the inverse of that. Something like someone has probably listened to the $50,000 Orpheus and then gone on the internet and been like, this thing sucks more than my Skull Candy earbuds. Stuff like that.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's raining a lot up there.
I was just thinking, it's kind of like the McLaren F1. It's like everybody's like, it's one of the best cars ever made now. Everybody looks back, but they didn't even sell out like of their low, like, it was like a couple hundred.
Yeah.
And they couldn't even sell those. So it's like the problem wasn't the product, It's like everybody's like, that is like a perfect vehicle, but
the
nobody
OG
bought 'em.
Dune.
Oh yeah.
That movie like flopped and then became like a cult classic years
yeah.
afterwards.
There's a lot of stuff like that where people say, oh, wow, it's so spectacular. How did this thing not take off? But they're saying this 20 years after it came out. And then you look back at the stuff that was published earlier about it when it came out, and everyone's like, this is the worst thing ever made. Who would design this?
Yeah, right.
And you see that a lot where a thing comes out and everyone bashes it, says it's garbage.
Yeah.
Time goes by and now it's spectacular.
Yeah.
Very curious.
It's
but
like,
sometimes
what's
it's
changed? Just, I guess, the understanding more than anything.
Like that. Yes.
Ahead of its time, as it were.
It can be that. Yeah.
That's how it goes.
Well, I think we kind of ramble on pretty much indefinitely on things like this.
Yeah.
But I would be curious to hear what other people have to know in the comments below, how they feel about this whole situation and the gap between reviewers and manufacturers, because there's no doubt there's a stark difference. And we kind of sort of vaguely went over it, but I think this is an endless discussion.
I think both a lot of reviewers and a lot of manufacturers could learn things from one another.
I think so, yes. There needs to be some degree of understanding between the two because they have different perspectives. And sometimes somebody's trying to get something across that doesn't get received properly.
Yeah.
Right? Like you make a thing that's designed toward this particular thing and someone says, I don't understand it because I don't care about the thing you designed it for.
Yeah, right.
And that's valid. There's nothing wrong with that. But, sometimes there's an audience for this product still. And the reviewer doesn't always see it. So it is really fickle. And you see this all the time. You see some people giving super negative reviews, other people super positive for the very same product.
Yeah. Oh, I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
Very curious from the outside looking in why this stuff is happening. But it happens nonetheless.
Yep. It probably always will.
Probably, yeah. I think maybe you could improve it a little bit, but it only goes so far.
It's one of those things.
Yes. So on that note, if anyone has any ideas for a future episode, they could send us an email, totl@abyssheadphones.com. Until then, take care.